They called Detective Frank Morrison the old dog chasing ghosts when he started working the Jennifer Walsh case again. 15 years cold, no new leads, no new evidence, just an obsessed cop who couldn't let go. His captain ordered him to stop. His colleagues mocked his late-night file reviews. But Morrison's obsession would uncover a killer who thought he'd gotten away with murder and expose a cover-up that reached the highest levels of the police department. Where in the world are you joining us from today? Drop your location in the comments. If stories of people who never give up on finding the truth inspire you, subscribe to Real Security Stories for more incredible tales of justice delayed but never denied. Detective Frank Morrison stared at the retirement papers on his desk, unsigned and gathering dust like everything else in his cluttered office. 28 years with the Chicago Police Department, and in 3 weeks, it would all be over. His pension was secured. His replacement had been chosen, and his farewell party was already planned. All he had to do was coast through the final days, close out his remaining cases, and walk away from a career that had defined his entire adult life. But Frank Morrison had never been good at letting things go. At 59, he was one of the old guard, a detective who had learned police work before computers, before DNA analysis, before cell phone records made tracking suspects easier. He solved cases through shoe leather, intuition, and an almost supernatural ability to remember details that others overlooked. His clearance rate was among the highest in the department, but his methods were considered outdated by younger detectives, who preferred digital forensics to door-to-door interviews. Morrison's desk was a testament to his methodical nature. Case files were stacked in precise order, witness statements were annotated in his meticulous handwriting, and evidence photos were organized chronologically. His colleagues joked that he kept better records than the department's official filing system, and they weren't entirely wrong, which is how he ended up pulling the Jennifer Walsh file on a quiet Tuesday afternoon when he should have been completing his transition paperwork. Jennifer Walsh had been 23 years old when she was found murdered in her Lincoln Park apartment. On March 15, 2008, a graduate student at Northwestern University, she was studying to become a social worker and volunteered at a domestic violence shelter. She had no enemies, no dangerous relationships, no apparent reason for someone to want her dead. The crime scene had been brutal but organized. Jennifer had been stabbed multiple times with a kitchen knife, but there was no evidence of sexual assault, no signs of struggle, and no indication of robbery. Her apartment was neat except for the crime scene itself, suggesting her killer had known her well enough to be invited inside. The initial investigation had been thorough by 2008 standards. Detectives interviewed friends, family members, co-workers, and fellow students. They examined her computer, her phone records, and her financial information. They tested DNA evidence and checked fingerprints. But after 6 months of intensive investigation, the leads dried up. The case was officially designated open but inactive, police terminology for unsolved. Over the next 15 years, the Jennifer Walsh case had been reviewed multiple times. New detectives would request the file, convinced they could find something their predecessors had missed. Cold case units would periodically re-examine the evidence, but each review reached the same conclusion. Without new evidence or witnesses, the case was unsolvable. Frank Morrison had been peripherally involved in the original investigation, handling some of the witness interviews and background checks. He remembered the case clearly: Jennifer's grieving parents, the frustration of the lead detectives, the gradual realization that they were facing a nearly perfect crime. What brought the case back to his attention was a routine administrative task. The department was digitizing old case files, and Morrison had been assigned to review several cold cases for potential archive storage. The Jennifer Walsh file was among them, and as he flipped through the familiar documents, something nagged at him. It was a small thing, the kind of detail that might be meaningless to most people, but set off alarm bells in the mind of an experienced detective. According to the original case file, Jennifer Walsh had been found by her roommate, Sarah Chen, who had returned from a weekend trip to find Jennifer's body in their shared apartment. Sarah Chen had been thoroughly investigated and cleared of suspicion. She had a solid alibi. Airline records showed she had been in San Francisco visiting family when the murder occurred. Security footage from O'Hare Airport confirmed her departure and return dates. Phone records showed she had called Jennifer several times during the weekend, but had received no response, which was consistent with Jennifer being dead. But as Morrison reviewed Sarah Chen's statement, he noticed something that had been overlooked in the original investigation. Chen had mentioned that Jennifer's laptop was missing from her bedroom. This detail was noted in the file but had never been followed up on because investigators assumed the killer had taken it to prevent being identified through emails or social media. However, Morrison remembered something from his own experience with the case. During his witness interviews, he had spoken with Jennifer's study group partners from Northwestern. One of them had mentioned that Jennifer always brought her laptop to their weekly meetings at the university library. The meetings were held every Sunday evening, and Jennifer's body had been discovered on a Monday morning. If Jennifer had taken her laptop to the study group meeting on Sunday night, and if she had been killed Sunday night or early Monday morning, then the laptop should have been in her apartment when she was murdered. Its absence might not indicate that the killer took it to hide evidence. It might indicate that Jennifer had never returned home from the study group meeting. This possibility had enormous implications for the case timeline and the list of potential suspects. Morrison spent the next 3 days quietly reviewing every document in the Jennifer Walsh file. He cross-referenced witness statements, re-examined the timeline and looked for inconsistencies that might have been missed in the original investigation. What he found troubled him deeply. According to the case file, Jennifer's study group had met at Northwestern's library on Sunday, March 14, 2008 from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. 3 students confirmed Jennifer's attendance, and library security footage showed her entering the building at 5. However, there was no footage of her leaving the building, and her car was found parked outside her apartment building, not at the university. The original investigators had assumed Jennifer returned home after the study session and was killed later that evening, but Morrison realized no one had actually confirmed that Jennifer had left the library that night. The security system only recorded entrances, not exits, and the overnight cleaning crew had found Jennifer's laptop bag in a study carrel the following Tuesday, 3 days after her body was discovered. Morrison pulled the library's staff schedules from 2008 and discovered something even more troubling. The head librarian at the time was David Kellner, a 45-year-old man who had access to all areas of the building and worked late evening shifts. Kellner's name appeared nowhere in the original investigation files. When Morrison ran Kellner's name through the department's database, he found a disturbing pattern. In 2010, 2 years after Jennifer's murder, Kellner had been arrested for stalking a female graduate student at DePaul University. The charges were dropped when the victim withdrew her complaint, but the incident report noted that Kellner had been following the woman for months and had detailed knowledge of her daily routine. In 2013, Kellner was fired from his position at a public library in Milwaukee after female employees complained about inappropriate behavior and unwanted attention. Again, no formal charges were filed, but the pattern was unmistakable. Morrison knew he was onto something significant, but when he tried to discuss his findings with his colleagues, he met resistance. Detective Lisa Rodriguez was the first to dismiss Morrison's theory. At 34, she was part of the new generation of investigators who relied heavily on digital forensics and data analysis. She had little patience for what she considered old-fashioned detective work. "Frank, you're seeing patterns that aren't there," she said when Morrison outlined his suspicions about David Kellner. "The Jennifer Walsh case has been reviewed dozens of times by dozens of detectives. If there was something to find, someone would have found it." Detective Mike Torres was more direct in his criticism. "Come on, Frank, you're 3 weeks from retirement. You should be planning fishing trips, not chasing 15-year-old cases. This is exactly the kind of obsession that burns out good cops." Even Morrison's partner, Detective Sarah Kim, expressed concerns about his focus on the case. "Frank, I've worked with you for 8 years, and I've never seen you this fixated on a cold case. Maybe it's time to let this one go." The departmental resistance intensified when Morrison requested permission to interview David Kellner. Lieutenant Captain James Murphy, Morrison's direct supervisor, was blunt in his refusal. "Detective Morrison, I'm ordering you to drop this investigation. The Jennifer Walsh case is closed pending new evidence, and what you've described doesn't constitute new evidence. I need you focused on active cases, not chasing ghosts from But Morrison couldn't let it go. The more resistance he encountered, the more convinced he became that his colleagues were missing something crucial. He began working on the case during his off hours, using his own time and resources to follow leads that the department wouldn't authorize. His fellow detectives started calling him the old dog chasing ghosts. The nickname was meant to be playful, but Morrison could hear the underlying concern in their voices. They thought he was losing his objectivity, becoming dangerously obsessed with a case that had already consumed too much of his mental energy. Morrison's wife, Ellen, noticed the change in his behavior as well. He would come home from work and immediately retreat to his home office, where he would spread out case files and photographs across his desk. He stopped watching television in the evenings, stopped reading his mystery novels, stopped engaging in the hobbies that had always helped him decompress from the stress of police work. "Frank, you're supposed to be winding down, not ramping up," Ellen told him one evening as she found him still reviewing witness statements at midnight. "This case is taking over your life." "I'm close to something, Ellen," Morrison replied without looking up from the files. "I can feel it. I just need a little more time." "You said that last week, and the week before. How much time are you going to spend on a case that might not even be solvable?" Morrison looked up at his wife of 32 years, seeing the concern and frustration in her eyes. "As much time as it takes." Morrison's persistence began to pay off when he decided to conduct his own surveillance of David Kellner. Using vacation days and personal time, he followed Kellner for a week, documenting his movements and behavior patterns. What he observed was deeply disturbing. Kellner, now 60 years old, worked as a part-time security guard at a downtown office building. His job gave him access to multiple floors and after-hours areas, similar to his previous position at the university library. During his surveillance, Morrison watched Kellner follow several young women, always maintaining enough distance to avoid detection, but clearly tracking their movements. On Wednesday evening, Morrison observed Kellner following a woman from the office building to a nearby coffee shop. Kellner sat 2 tables away, pretending to read a newspaper while obviously watching the woman. When she left, he followed her to the parking garage and watched her get into her car. Morrison photographed the woman's license plate and later discovered she was a 26-year-old marketing assistant named Rachel Torres, who worked in the same building as Kellner. When Morrison discreetly contacted Torres, she confirmed that she had noticed a man following her on several occasions, but hadn't reported it because she wasn't certain and didn't want to seem paranoid. The pattern was consistent with a stalker who had learned to be more careful after his previous encounters with law enforcement. Morrison was convinced that Kellner had been engaging in this behavior for years, possibly decades, and that Jennifer Walsh had been one of his victims. But Morrison needed more than circumstantial evidence to build a case. He needed physical evidence linking Kellner to the murder, or a confession, or some other definitive proof of guilt. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Detective Maria Santos had recently been assigned to the department's cold case unit, a small division that specialized in reviewing unsolved murders and disappearances. Santos had heard about Morrison's unofficial investigation through department gossip and was curious about his findings. Unlike Morrison's other colleagues, Santos didn't dismiss his theory about David Kellner. She had worked enough cold cases to know that fresh eyes and different perspectives often revealed overlooked evidence. "Frank, I'd like to take a formal look at the Jennifer Walsh case," Santos told him during a chance encounter in the department break room. "If you're right about Kellner, there might be forensic evidence that wasn't tested with current technology." Morrison was surprised by Santos's interest but grateful for the support. For weeks he had felt like he was fighting the case alone, facing skepticism and outright opposition from his colleagues. Having another detective validate his concerns gave him renewed confidence in his investigation. Santos used her position in the cold case unit to officially reopen the Jennifer Walsh file. This gave her access to all physical evidence, including items that had been stored but never tested due to technological limitations. And the first breakthrough came from DNA analysis of trace evidence found under Jennifer's fingernails. In 2008, the amount of biological material was too small for meaningful analysis, but advances in DNA technology allowed Santos to extract a partial profile that could be used for comparison purposes. The second breakthrough came from re-examining Jennifer's laptop bag, which had been found in the library 3 days after her murder. Using UV light and chemical enhancement techniques not available in 2008, Santos discovered partial fingerprints on the bag's zipper and handle. The fingerprints were clear enough for comparison analysis, and when Santos ran them through the FBI's database, she got a hit. The prints belonged to David Kellner. Armed with DNA evidence and fingerprint analysis, Santos and Morrison received authorization to question Kellner about his connection to Jennifer Walsh. The interview was scheduled for a Friday morning in the department's main interrogation room, with Captain Murphy observing through a one-way mirror. Kellner arrived accompanied by a public defender, suggesting he understood the seriousness of the situation. At 60, he was thin and nondescript, with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked like the kind of person who would blend into any crowd, exactly the type of individual who could stalk victims without drawing attention. Morrison began the interview by establishing Kellner's employment history and his presence at Northwestern University during March 2008. Kellner admitted to working at the library during that period but claimed he had no specific memory of Jennifer Walsh. "Kellner, we found your fingerprints on the laptop bag belonging to Jennifer Walsh, a murder victim from 2008, Santos said, showing him the forensic reports. "Can you explain how your prints got on her personal belongings?" Kellner's demeanor changed immediately. The casual confidence he had displayed at the beginning of the interview gave way to visible nervousness. He fidgeted with his hands, avoided eye contact, and began speaking in shorter, more defensive sentences. "I handled a lot of bags and personal items when I worked at the library," Kellner replied. "Students would leave things behind, and I would move them to lost and found. I probably handled hundreds of bags over the years." Morrison leaned forward across the table. "Miss Kellner, Jennifer's laptop bag was found in a study carrel 3 days after her murder. According to library records, that carrel was in a section that required staff access to reach. Only employees with master keys could get to that area after hours. I don't remember every bag I moved or every area I cleaned," Kellner insisted. "It was 15 years ago." Santos introduced the DNA evidence next. "We also found biological material under Jennifer's fingernails that matches your DNA profile. Can you explain how your DNA got under the fingernails of a murder victim?" This was the moment when Kellner's composure completely collapsed. His hands began shaking, and he looked toward his attorney with obvious panic in his eyes. "I want to stop this interview," the public defender interjected. "My client needs time to consider his options." But Morrison wasn't finished. "David, Jennifer was a good person. She was trying to help people through her work at the domestic violence shelter. She had a family who loved her, friends who cared about her. For 15 years they've been wondering who killed her and why. Don't you think they deserve answers?" Kellner stared at the table for a long moment, tears forming in his eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I never meant for her to die." Over the next 3 hours, David Kellner provided a full confession to the murder of Jennifer Walsh. His account revealed a crime of opportunity that had been years in the making. Kellner had been working at Northwestern's library for 6 years when he first noticed Jennifer Walsh. She was a frequent visitor to the library, often staying late to work on research projects. Kellner became obsessed with her daily routine, her study habits, and her personal life. "I used to watch her through the security monitors," Kellner admitted. "She was so focused, so dedicated to her studies. I would time my rounds to coincide with her study sessions, finding excuses to walk past her corral." Over several months, Kellner's obsession intensified. He began following Jennifer outside the library, learning her schedule, and tracking her movements around campus. He discovered where she lived, where she worked, and where she spent her free time. "I told myself I was just interested in her as a person," Kellner said. "I thought maybe someday I would work up the courage to talk to her, to ask her out, but I knew she would never be interested in someone like me." On the night of March 14, 2008, Kellner had been working his usual evening shift when he noticed Jennifer working alone in one of the library's remote study areas. The building was nearly empty, with only a few students scattered throughout the main reading room. "I went to check on her, maybe to start a conversation," Kellner explained. "But when I approached her table, she looked scared. She asked what I wanted, why I was there. I think she had noticed me watching her over the months." According to Kellner's confession, Jennifer had confronted him about his surveillance behavior. She threatened to report him to library administration and campus security. Kellner panicked, realizing that his obsession would be exposed and his job would be in jeopardy. "I grabbed her to try to stop her from leaving," Kellner said. "I just wanted to talk to her, to explain that I wasn't trying to hurt her, but she fought back, started screaming. I covered her mouth with my hand, and she bit me. That's when I lost control." Kellner strangled Jennifer with his bare hands, then realized he needed to dispose of her body and make it look like she had been killed somewhere else. He put her body in a library maintenance cart and transported it to the parking garage, where he loaded it into his car. "I drove to her apartment building and used her keys to get inside," Kellner continued. "I made it look like she had been killed there, using a knife from her kitchen to cover up the strangulation marks. I thought if the police believed she had been murdered at home, they would never connect it to the library or to me." Kellner's plan had nearly worked. The crime scene staging was sophisticated enough to fool the original investigators, and his access to library security systems allowed him to ensure that no footage existed of Jennifer leaving the building. But Kellner's confession revealed something even more disturbing than the murder itself. During the original investigation in 2008, he had actively worked to misdirect police attention away from the library. "When the detectives came to interview library staff, I volunteered to help them," Kellner said. I provided them with security footage from the main entrances, but told them our overnight storage tapes had been recycled. I answered their questions about Jennifer's study habits and suggested they look at her personal relationships instead of her academic life. Kellner had manipulated the investigation from within, using his position as a helpful witness to control what information police received. He had destroyed evidence, misdirected attention, and exploited the investigators' trust in his cooperation. Even more troubling, Kellner revealed that he had been questioned about Jennifer's murder by Detective Robert Hayes, who had been the lead investigator on the case. Hayes had suspected that someone with library access might be involved, but Kellner had provided him with false information about security procedures and staff schedules. Detective Hayes kept asking about after-hours access and whether anyone could move around the building without being detected. Kellner admitted, I told him our security was too tight for that to be possible. I gave him a list of staff members who had been working that night, but I left my own name off the list. Morrison's blood ran cold as he realized the implications. Detective Robert Hayes had been close to solving the case in 2008, but he had been deliberately misled by the killer himself. Hayes had retired 5 years ago, but Morrison remembered him as a thorough investigator who rarely gave up on cases. What happened to Detective Hayes's investigation? Morrison asked. Kellner's answer was devastating. He kept pushing, kept asking questions. He was getting too close to the truth. So I called in an anonymous tip saying I had seen Jennifer with an older man who looked like he might be violent. I described someone who looked like Hayes himself. The anonymous tip had triggered an internal affairs investigation of Detective Hayes, based on the suggestion that he might have had a personal relationship with the victim. The investigation found no evidence of wrongdoing, but the distraction and professional stress caused Hayes to request transfer to a different caseload. Kellner had destroyed not only Jennifer Walsh's life, but potentially Robert Hayes's career as well. As Kellner's confession continued, Morrison and Santos realized they were dealing with a serial predator whose crimes extended far beyond Jennifer Walsh's murder. Kellner admitted to stalking dozens of women over a period of 20 years, from his early days as a university library employee, through his various positions at public libraries and office buildings. Most of his victims never knew they were being watched, but several had reported feeling followed or unsafe without being able to identify the source of their fear. I would pick women who seemed vulnerable or isolated, Kellner explained. Students who studied alone, office workers who stayed late, women who appeared to have limited social networks. I would learn their routines and follow them for months or sometimes years. In most cases, Kellner's stalking behavior remained at the level of surveillance and fantasy. But in at least 3 instances, he had escalated to physical contact or attempted assault. In 2010, the incident that led to his stalking arrest had involved a DePaul University student named Michelle Rodriguez. Kellner had been following her for 8 months when she noticed him outside her apartment building. When she confronted him, he had attempted to grab her, but she escaped and reported the incident to police. In 2013, his termination from the Milwaukee Library had been the result of his attempted assault on a female co-worker. Lisa Bennett had been working late when Kellner cornered her in a storage room and tried to force himself on her. She managed to fight him off and reported the incident, but Kellner claimed it was a misunderstanding and the case was not prosecuted. Most disturbing, Kellner revealed that he had killed another woman in 2015. Angela Torres, a 29-year-old paralegal, had been found murdered in her Chicago apartment in what appeared to be a random burglary. But Kellner confessed that he had been stalking Torres for months and had killed her when she discovered his surveillance. She caught me going through her mail, Kellner said. She threatened to call the police, and I panicked. I hit her with a paperweight from her desk, then staged the scene to look like a robbery. Morrison realized that the Angela Torres case had never been solved. The murder had been assigned to a different detective and had been classified as a cold case after the initial investigation failed to identify any suspects. Word of Kellner's confession spread quickly through the Chicago Police Department. Within hours, Morrison found himself at the center of attention from colleagues who had dismissed his investigation just days earlier. Detective Lisa Rodriguez was among the first to approach Morrison after news of the confession became public. "Frank, I owe you an apology," she said. "You were right about this case, and I was wrong to dismiss your concerns." Detective Mike Torres was more subdued in his acknowledgement. "I should have listened to you, Frank. Your instincts were better than our technology. Even Captain Murphy, who had ordered Morrison to drop the investigation, admitted that the department had made a mistake. Detective Morrison, your persistence and thoroughness have brought justice to the Jennifer Walsh family and potentially prevented future crimes. The department owes you a debt of gratitude. But Morrison felt no satisfaction in being proven right. 2 women were dead because David Kellner had been allowed to operate freely for 15 years. Detective Robert Hayes had been professionally damaged by a false accusation. Countless other women had been terrorized by a predator who should have been caught in. This case should have been solved years ago, Morrison told Captain Murphy. If the original investigation had been more thorough, if we had followed up on every lead, Jennifer Walsh might be alive today. The vindication was bittersweet. Morrison had achieved his goal of solving the case, but the victory came with the knowledge that his success was built on the failures of the system he had served for nearly 3 decades. David Kellner's trial became one of the most closely watched criminal proceedings in Chicago's recent history. The case attracted media attention not only because of the murders, but because of the systematic failures in the original investigation and the cover-up that had allowed Kellner to escape justice for 15 years. Morrison testified extensively about his investigation and the evidence that had been overlooked in 2008. His testimony was detailed and methodical, walking the jury through each step of his analysis and explaining how he had connected Kellner to the murders. Detective Morrison's investigation demonstrates the importance of persistence and attention to detail in police work, the prosecutor told the jury in closing arguments. His refusal to accept that this case was unsolvable ultimately brought justice to the victims and their family. Kellner's defense attorney attempted to argue that the confessions had been coerced and that the physical evidence was circumstantial, but the combination of DNA evidence, fingerprints, and detailed confessions proved overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges: 2 counts of first-degree murder, multiple counts of stalking, and obstruction of justice for his interference with the original investigation. Kellner was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Morrison's role in solving the Jennifer Walsh case transformed him from a soon-to-be retiree into a department legend. His persistence and analytical skills became the subject of training seminars and case studies taught at police academies throughout the region. But Morrison struggled with the recognition. He was haunted by the knowledge that his success had come too late for Jennifer Walsh and Angela Torres. He wondered how many other cold cases might be solvable if investigators were willing to look beyond the obvious suspects and examine evidence with fresh perspectives. 3 weeks after Kellner's sentencing, Morrison submitted his retirement paper. But instead of walking away from police work entirely, he accepted a position as a consultant with the department's cold case unit, working part-time to review unsolved murders and disappearances. "I can't bring back the victims," Morrison told his wife Ellen on his official last day as a full-time detective. "But maybe I can prevent other families from going through what the Walshes and Torres families have endured." Morrison's first case as a consultant involved a 2003 murder that had been classified as unsolvable. Within 2 weeks, he had identified 3 potential suspects who had been overlooked in the original investigation. The Jennifer Walsh case led to significant changes in how the Chicago Police Department handled cold cases and missing persons investigation. Morrison's methodical approach became the template for reviewing old cases, with emphasis on re-examining evidence with new technology and questioning assumptions made during original investigation. Detective Maria Santos was promoted to head the expanded cold case unit, which received additional funding and personnel based on the success of the Walsh investigation. The unit adopted Morrison's practice of maintaining detailed case files and cross-referencing seemingly unrelated crimes to identify patterns that might connect to serial offenders. The case also highlighted the importance of protecting investigators from interference and false accusations. The department implemented new procedures for handling anonymous tips that attempted to implicate law enforcement personnel in criminal activity. Detective Robert Hayes, who had been misdirected during the original investigation, was invited back to the department as a consultant. He worked with Morrison and Santos to review other cases from the 2008-2010 period to determine whether Kellner's interference had affected additional investigations. Perhaps most importantly, the case demonstrated that persistence and attention to detail could overcome technological limitations and institutional resistance. Morrison's success inspired other detectives to re-examine cold cases that had been dismissed as unsolvable. For Jennifer Walsh's parents, Morrison's investigation brought a mixture of closure and renewed grief. They had spent 15 years wondering who had killed their daughter and why. Learning the truth provided answers, but it also forced them to confront the reality that their daughter's murderer had been free to kill again. "We're grateful to Detective Morrison for never giving up on our daughter's case," Jennifer's mother, Patricia Walsh, said in a statement after Kellner's conviction. "His persistence and dedication gave us the justice we had almost given up hoping for." Angela Torres's family experienced similar emotions. They had believed their daughter's murder was a random crime. But learning that she had been stalked for months by a serial killer added a new dimension to their grief. Both families became advocates for improved cold case procedures and increased funding for units that specialized in reviewing unsolved crimes. They worked with Morrison and Santos to establish a victims' family support group that helped other families navigate the challenges of long-term investigations. 5 years after his official retirement, Morrison continued working as a consultant for the cold case unit. He had helped solve 12 additional murders and had identified patterns that led to arrests in 6 other cases. His reputation extended beyond Chicago, and he frequently traveled to other cities to consult on difficult cold cases. Police departments across the country sought his expertise in reviewing evidence and identifying overlooked leads. Morrison also became a frequent speaker at law enforcement conferences, where he taught other detectives about the importance of questioning assumptions and maintaining detailed case files. His presentations emphasized that solving cold cases required different skills than investigating fresh crimes. "The evidence in cold cases doesn't change," Morrison would tell audiences of detectives, "but our ability to interpret that evidence improves with experience and technology. What seems impossible today might be solvable tomorrow if we're willing to keep looking." Despite his success with the Jennifer Walsh case and other cold case investigations, Morrison remained troubled by the crimes that remained unsolved. His home office was filled with case files for murders, disappearances, and assaults that had defeated multiple investigations. Each file represented a family that had been denied justice, a victim whose story remained unfinished. Morrison knew that time was working against him. Evidence degraded, witnesses died, and memories faded with each passing year. But he also knew that persistence could overcome seemingly impossible odds. The Jennifer Walsh case had taught him that obsession, properly channeled, could be a powerful tool for justice. People call it obsession when you won't give up on something everyone else has abandoned, Morrison reflected during an interview with a police magazine. But sometimes obsession is just another word for caring enough to see the truth. Morrison's commitment to cold cases inspired a new generation of detectives who understood that solving crimes sometimes required years of patient investigation. His methods were being taught at police academies, and his case files served as templates for other investigators. The story of Detective Frank Morrison and the Jennifer Walsh case serves as a reminder that justice doesn't always come quickly or easily. Sometimes it requires someone willing to be called obsessed, to be mocked by colleagues, to sacrifice personal comfort for the pursuit of truth. Morrison proved that experience and intuition could be as valuable as technology, and that fresh perspectives could reveal evidence that had been hidden in plain sight for years. His investigation demonstrated the importance of questioning assumptions and challenging conventional wisdom. Most importantly, the case showed that victims and their families deserve advocates who will never stop fighting for justice, regardless of how much time has passed or how impossible the case might seem. Frank Morrison retired from active police work, but he never stopped being a detective. His obsession with the truth had saved lives, brought criminals to justice, and provided closure to families who had almost given up hope. In a profession where success is often measured by arrest statistics and clearance rates, Morrison understood that the most important victories are the ones that might never be recognized publicly. Solving a cold case doesn't generate headlines or promotions. It simply means that somewhere, a family finally has answers. And sometimes, that's enough. From which city around the world are you watching this story of persistence and justice today? Have you ever been called obsessed for refusing to give up on something important? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If stories of people who never stop fighting for the truth inspire you, subscribe to Real Security Stories, because sometimes the most important work happens when everyone else has given up, and justice is just one persistent person away from being served.